Welcome back to the Buckeye Breakdown Podcast, where Buckeyes Now continues to evaluate what this 2021 season could look like, should look like, hopefully will look like for the Ohio State Buckeyes. We are excited that kickoff now is just about 2 days away, just over 48 hours, in fact. And we've got a fun podcast planned for you this afternoon. Along with Brett Hiltbrand, I'm Brendan Gulick. Brett, with a game on Thursday, that means today is Tuesday, but it's really Thursday, if that makes any sense at all, because usually we're operating on a Saturday schedule. So typically what I think we're going to do here a couple days out is kind of take a deep dive look at some of the numbers and stats leading up to the game, try to identify some trends we think could be, an emphasis at a minimum, and try to give people a little bit better idea of things they can look for when they're getting ready to watch a game.
Yeah, week one, and we're going very meta here with the timeline. So bear with us a little bit as we try and kind of mess a little bit with kind of the overall routine, because, we're starting off and it's going to be totally different than pretty much the rest of the season, which is fantastic.
And if you have questions along the way, please drop comments either on our YouTube channel. If you're watching this live, we also stream live on our Twitter and Facebook platforms. But there's lots of different ways to consume our content, and certainly BuckeyesNow.com, the home for everything you want to see that is written about Ohio State. And beyond that, if you're listening after the fact, this is a podcast that's posted in lots of different places as well. So just know you can interact with us live if that's something you're interested in doing. In the meantime, Brett, let's talk a little bit about the Ohio State offense against Minnesota's defense. Let's start there. Buckeye offense obviously has a ridiculous amount of talent and a lot of hype coming into the season. A good bit of that surrounds C.J. Stroud, but an awful lot of that, I think, is about the wide receiving core, the depth at running back, the strength of this offensive line. Let's talk about some of these numbers here from at least where the Buckeyes were last year. And by the way, let's say caveat up front, the statistics we're using are from last year because that's all we've got. But hopefully it can at least be a good starting point, a good jumping off point of maybe where these teams had their focus a bit during the offseason to try and address certain areas or strengthen certain areas within the team. I think that's a fair place to at least start before the opener. Ohio State offensively last year, one of the best scoring offenses in the country. They routinely put up 5-6 touchdowns a game. The Buckeyes averaged 25.8 points per game, and that included only 22 against Northwestern in a game that the offense really struggled, and only 24 points against Alabama, against one of the best teams in college football history. Most of the time, this offense scored at will. So just from that perspective, I think with so many returning players, you can expect that Ohio State is likely to score 4 or 5 touchdowns. Is that a fair place to start?
I think it's not only fair. I think 4 or 5 touchdowns is like the baseline expectation for any Ohio State football team that goes out, regardless of how many starters come back, regardless of the fact that your quarterback really hasn't taken an actual pressure snap in his career. So I think that's bare minimum what both fans and kind of the collective, Buckeye Nation expect from the offense. So I think that's more than fair.
I'm going to share my screen here so that we have a chance to take a look at some of the numbers that I want to share with you here. We've got a couple of great stories, I think, that illustrate this over on Buckeyes Now, BuckeyesNow.com. Let's get that. Ooh, that's a little outrageous. Let's get that out of the way. Yeah, right. All right. That is. Oh, you know what? That's the wrong window. So that's a great start. Let's try that one more time. I don't want to give anybody.
I'm glad you're at the controls here because I would have shut the whole thing down. So.
I don't want anybody to feel like they are tripping on something. So let's get let's get on screen one. And
like most things during football season, pacing yourself properly is probably the most important thing you can do, both on game day and throughout the week.
There it is. All right. So now you have at least some general idea of kind of what we're looking at here as we're talking about this. That is the scoring defense. So let's get the offensive ones up because that's where we started. All right. Ohio State's scoring offense against Minnesota's scoring defense. Buckeyes, I think I may have said that backwards in that opening comment there. The Buckeyes were allowing 27 points per game. That's why it didn't sound right. All right. Hard restart. 41 points per game. That makes a lot more sense. It was an offense last year that was one of the most efficient offenses in the country. They obviously ran the ball well, but I think last year's team had a lot of balance. Justin Fields could kind of move it wherever he wanted through the air. But I think Ohio State did a great job of not being too predictable last year between the run and the pass. And frankly, Minnesota's defense last year really struggled. I think, their defensive line was hammered by some COVID-related issues. That was obviously pretty frustrating for them. They couldn't really get in much of a rhythm. But, man, the first 2 games of the year were pretty ugly. I mean, they gave up 570 rushing yards and 8 touchdowns in the first 2 games. And while they got a little bit better as the season went along, overall not particularly impressive. So, yeah.
Especially remember that Maryland game where I believe they lost in overtime to a Maryland team that was not great. And just on how their defense looked, kind of like they were at 6s and 7s a little bit in very specific like personnel situations that Maryland was trotting out there. They had no answers, and there was nobody that could give it to them from the coaching staff too. So some growing pains a year ago, which I think in a lot of ways you can make the argument that it actually helps them, that they went through that last year coming into this year, especially how many guys they have coming back. Starters they have coming back this season.
Offensively, I think CJ Stroud has high expectations, but there is an element of you got to go out there and do it. And so I don't want to get too carried away with what we're expecting to see from him. But I think if we maybe transition a bit here to the passing side, it's fair to point out that Ohio State's receiving core is, if not the best in the country, it's certainly in that conversation. And so he's got a lot of weapons around him. Will he put up 260 passing yards per game? We don't know. We know Ryan Day has an offense that likes to stretch the field. We know they typically have protections that, give the quarterback time to throw. A lot of times the Buckeyes last year had 6 or 7, in protection. And when Fields had time to find a really talented route runner, whomever it was, open, he eventually would find somebody open. I think the Indiana game jumps out to me as the game where, defensively the Hoosiers tried to bring more pressure than the Buckeyes could block. And for a while it was pretty frustrating. I remember the running backs in that game as involved in pass protection as any game that I can remember in recent memory for the Buckeyes. So, the passing numbers last year were obviously really good. Big number that jumps off the page here to me. Minnesota's defense managed only 8 sacks in 7 games last year. Not good enough. They've got to find a way to be better in that regard.
And not good enough too when you consider who they played and how bad some of those teams were too, right? I think the big one for me, if you're looking at the Ohio State side of this, is the yards per attempt, and how that 9.3 number is pretty darn good. And that's indicative of a couple things. One, that's indicative of the when we talk about mismatches and what Ryan Day is trying to achieve with both play calls pre-snap and then that check to the sideline to then either confirm or change that original play call. And a lot of times if you see a team change that, more often than not, it has everything to do with the personnel of the defense that's in at that time, and really less so about how they line up. And I thought Ohio State did a really great job of exploiting kind of that middle part of the field if there were extra linebackers on the field, and then either trying to go up over the top or underneath, or even a running play if teams put an extra defensive back on the field. I think this season, with what they're going to try and ask of CJ Stroud, you're going to see 2 things come down right away. I think the yards per attempt number will not be anywhere close to 9.3 at the end of the season. I think that's fair. And I think the yards per game as well will probably come down, just simply because they're not trying to ask him to go out and throw that much that often that early in the season. Now, I do think as the season progresses, perhaps you might see his usage go up. The vertical passing attempts might go up as well. But I think they're going to try and give him, kind of spoon feed him a little bit early on. And they know that you don't necessarily get the same. We talked about this the last time we were here on the air. You don't get maybe the same type of warm up that you would get in a traditional schedule with some two non-conference cupcakes, so to speak, that you would traditionally see until that third game, which is usually kind of the premier non-conference game of the season. That doesn't happen. You get a Big Ten opponent who, like it or not, is in a different tier than probably who you would normally be scheduling. So he has to get it right a lot more than maybe perhaps guys in the past have had to. But I think Ryan Day and the coaching staff trust him, but I also think they're going to do their due diligence and making sure there's some high probability completions that are out there, and then really trying to build his confidence. But that yards per attempt will definitely go down.
And beyond that, we'll kind of move to the rushing side here. I think the Buckeyes have a chance to really try to establish a run early in the game. They've made it very clear they love their depth and their overall ability at running back. Tony Alford, Ryan Day, Kevin Wilson all think that the each one of those guys in the backfield brings something a little bit different. I have a hunch you're going to see at least Master Teague, Mayan Williams, Travion Henderson on Thursday, and you may even see Marcus Crowley depending on how the game goes. There were 127 schools that played FBS football last year. Minnesota was 123rd in tackles for loss. They were 124th in yards per carry allowed. And from that previous standpoint there in sacks, they were 118th. They had a miserable time generating any sort of pressure on the quarterback, and they were dominated on the line of scrimmage repeatedly. With a veteran big offensive line for the Buckeyes, I'm hard-pressed to believe that Minnesota is going to be able to come out and control the line of scrimmage. And I think that's going to take a lot of pressure off of C.J. Stroud. Even if it's not some big, gaudy rushing day from any one guy in particular, I just get the impression this could be a day the Buckeyes try to establish the run early and can move the ball down the field.
I would not be shocked that within that first series, maybe even like the first 2 or 3 plays, where you'll see maybe Ryan Day try and take a shot early, because I think they would expect Minnesota to try and come in and load the box and try and do that, quote unquote, establish the run early, because they know how much talent exists at that line of scrimmage, and also the inexperience at quarterback. So I would not be shocked if you see the OSU go downfield right away. But I think the overall kind of sentiment or game plan those first 2-3 series will be to try and score and control the clock at the same time. So I think you're absolutely right that you'll see a lot of usage from the running backs, early on especially. But I also think throughout the entire season, it'll be maybe a little bit more of a focal point than seasons past.
There are, in fairness, there are 3 grad transfers that have made their way onto the defense for Minnesota. And while the Gophers don't release a depth chart, I have a really hard time seeing these 3 guys not factoring in. If they're not starting, they're certainly going to play. Jack Gibbons, a linebacker, played 4 years at the FCS level with Abilene Christian, 258 total tackles, 23 tackles for loss, had 7 sacks and 5 interceptions. Realize it's the FCS level, but you're talking about a guy that's played a lot of college football, and for a group that needs, somebody to step up, he's got some experience. I would think Gibbons is going to see some time. Defensive lineman Val Martin spent a couple years at Iowa Western Community College. He comes to Minnesota after he had also played at North Carolina State. So probably going to see him on the defensive line, and a name that the Buckeyes certainly will at least somewhat recognize, even if you're not intimately familiar with him. Niles Pinckney, who played for Clemson and won a couple national championships in his 5-year stretch with the Clemson Tigers. You're going to start seeing some guys that have been around college football for a long time because of that extra COVID year, in addition to, maybe having a grad transfer or a redshirt somewhere along the way. A 6th-year player is not out of the question. So, there's a couple guys I think Minnesota is hoping can boost them a little bit. But it's my general belief that the Buckeyes are going to probably wear them down throughout the course of the game.
And I think that is indicative of what we're going to see from Ohio State, not just in this game, but also I think the primary theme as the season progresses. It's certainly what they're trying to do, given both the experience and size and physicality that the offensive line has this season.
Any other thoughts here? Maybe we talk about the Minnesota secondary, and their youth and inexperience. I mean, ever since Antoine Winfield Jr. a couple years ago played in that secondary, they really haven't had a lockdown guy. And I just tend to think that Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson are going to kind of find their way.
I think it'll be somewhat generic, kind of, cover 3, late bail cover 4, kind of defense from Minnesota. But I think that presents its own challenge, because then you're, trying to match up with, hat on a hat, so to speak, run defense a little bit. So, what will be a common theme that we'll be talking about a lot is who do you stop, so to speak, when it comes to the Ohio State offense. They present a lot of problems. They present a lot of challenges, and it's something that we're going to talk about a lot.
Cheryl's jumping in here and wants to know, will it be 60% run and 40% pass? I think that's probably a fair thought. I would be surprised if it were 50-50. I based off of what Ryan Day said yesterday, where he was basically asked point blank, do you have plans to play a second quarterback on Thursday, if for no other reason just to give another guy some valuable game experience and reps, because that's been a huge focal point for them. And Coach Day said no. He essentially came straight out and, without saying the words that this is CJ's team, the indication was, we are moving forward with CJ tomorrow, or I guess on Thursday. Mm-hmm. And then he was asked if he had a number 2 quarterback named, and he said no. Now, I'm less likely to believe that. I think perhaps he has some indication of who would be a number 2 going into the game if something happened and CJ had to come out. I think, to me, that's more trying to foster some of the competition and, keep Kyle McCord and Jack Miller and maybe even Quinn Ewers engaged in that battle. I don't really see a situation where Quinn gets in a game, even though he's obviously been in the news here as a fairly wealthy young man. He just signed a $1.4 million deal today with an autographing company. Look, I think the Buckeyes can take some pressure off of CJ by trying to run the football effectively. That has been a staple part of this offense for a while, is establishing the run, controlling the line of scrimmage. That's Big Ten football. The Buckeyes have some great athletes. They like to stretch the field. But I think if you can establish a run here week 1 and just figure out a way to win on the road in conference and come home with a victory, I think the Buckeyes will be pretty happy with that.
Yeah, to go back to answer the question, a year ago, Ohio State 345 rushing attempts, 225 passing attempts. That's about 65-35 run to pass ratio there. So to think it might be 60-40 would indicate that they're actually going to throw more with CJ Stroud than Justin Fields a year ago. So I think it's probably edging closer to 65-35 with what we saw last year, maybe even edging up into the high 60s, low 70s as far as run percentage goes throughout the season.
Thomas Huggins checks in and says hello. Thanks for hopping on as well. We appreciate that. Let's flip over to the defensive side now for Ohio State. Buckeye defense against Minnesota's offense. I think Minnesota's offense has a chance to be pretty decent. This team 2 years ago was good. I mean, they were very good. And they still have a lot of pieces coming back for this upcoming season that were part of a team, 2 years ago that was a top 15 team in the country. Mm-hmm. The big things that stand out, one, they have the most experienced offensive line in college football. They have more combined games played than any other offensive line in the country. And I believe, depending on who they start, I believe they are also the most experienced starting offensive line. In addition to that, they're huge. I mean, really, really big. And that's not even just pointing to a guy that's even bigger than DeJuan Jones that's going to play tackle, and Daniel Fa'alele from Australia. He's like 380 pounds or something and 6'9". I mean, it's ridiculous. They've got a great running back in Mo Ibrahim. The guy last year had a really good season. He comes into Thursday's game on a program record, 8 consecutive 100-yard rushing performances. I have to think that they're going to try to establish him. Tanner Morgan's had a good run. He's 18-8 as a starting quarterback. Obviously, last year wasn't terrific. 2 years ago, in a regular, full, normal-looking season, he threw 30 touchdowns, just 7 interceptions. Last year, it was 7-7. So he did not perform last year nearly as well, but he's obviously got some ability and talent. And at the receiver position, that's probably their big question mark. Chris Autman-Bell, it sounds like, is not officially ruled healthy enough to play yet. He might be able to play, but all the reports I'm reading out of Minnesota are essentially he's gone from week to week to day to we'll see. Right. He'd be their best their best option at wide receiver. They don't have a lot of proven receivers beyond that, so I'd be really surprised if Minnesota doesn't try to come out and establish the run early. I'm just not sure if they're going to be able to do it.
Yeah, and I think in a lot of ways this is a good example of kind of what we've been talking about over the last several weeks when we're discussing position battles at both the defensive line and at linebacker at Ohio State, and kind of how the guys who win those jobs really kind of then pay off, all that hard work when it comes to, playing in the game. I think in a lot of ways, Minnesota to me is a little bit of an enigma football wise in the Big Ten. And I don't know if that's, in part because of, their coach and his, obviously galactic sized kind of personality. That was me being kind. I wonder a little bit about, like, what does the actual football look like? You know what I'm saying? And I think if you haven't been paying attention in a very specific way to Big Ten football over the last couple of years, you just kind of assume that, it's Minnesota football and it's average at best. And, you hope to score a major upset every 3 to 5 years. I think that what is actually the case is that they were trending in a good way, and then they were hit especially hard by all of the restrictions and COVID and everything last year. And in a lot of ways, I think they paid a bigger price than maybe other teams in the Big Ten did, both with success on the field, but also I think with development. So knowing or even projecting kind of what we're going to see from this team feels a little bit like a guess on our part. I think you have to kind of, in a lot of ways, you almost have to lean into what the potential is and what the potential could be for that program. And I think personnel wise, outside of some of those questions at wide receiver, this is a team that has potential to be pretty good on paper, right? Things look like they are stacked in their favor to be competitive at the very least, if not very competitive in Big Ten play. So for me, this is more about, because we kind of don't really know what you're going to get from the Gophers. It's more about, okay, some guys on the OSU defensive line who haven't played a ton. It's time for you to step up. New linebacker group, time to step up. Your DBs were maybe the worst defensive back group in the entire country. Well, now it's time to kind of flip that script. And you know what? You have a team in front of you here to be able to try and do that.
Last year, Minnesota offensively at times looked good. It was
flashes, right? That's kind of what we're talking about. The flashes of potential here that are indicators of them taking a pretty big step from what they have been traditionally to what they're, kind of this new regime that's existed the last couple seasons.
I spoke yesterday and posted the podcast with Gopher Illustrated publisher Ryan Burns. Does a really, really nice job. He's got some great content on their website if you're interested in learning more about Minnesota this week. And, I asked him a little bit about the future of the program and how they felt about recruiting because this is now the 5th year for PJ Fleck, and you're talking about how big his personality is. I agree. He's one of the more fun coaches to watch across the conference. Ohio State fans don't get to see him a ton because the Buckeyes and Gophers don't play each other every year. In fact, they've only played a couple of times in the last decade now. But I don't know. I think he's got a pretty good thing going on up there. And Ryan Burns, yesterday, basically said that they're recruiting about as well as they ever have during his tenure. They're never going to have a recruiting class like Ohio State's, but they could certainly be, in the top 30 in the country if they recruit well enough. And their big challenge is trying to find ways to consistently compete with the likes of Wisconsin and Northwestern and Iowa in the Western Division. And, a couple of years ago, they had a really good chance to go to the Big Ten title game, but they really didn't play a very good game at all against Wisconsin in that last game of the regular season. And, then Wisconsin went on to lose to the Buckeyes in Indianapolis.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, they're not that far away from being pretty good.
And this is a great example of to kind of expand the conversation a little bit from what we were talking about the last time with the future of Michigan football and what another like disastrous year for that program, what that could mean for them long term, right? And so when we talk about recruiting specific to Minnesota, okay, and how they kind of compare or juxtapose a little bit with Ohio State, right? These two programs are not necessarily going after the same group of guys, the same group of high school players, right? So we're talking a little bit about two different tiers. But the thing is that while the gap in those tiers is huge, and you can find, plenty of reading material out there on the interwebs as far as the 4 and 5 star guys and what those rankings mean for your overall long-term success as far as both stacking recruiting classes and also on-field success. But despite the gap between kind of these tiers being huge, you only have to necessarily put it together for 4 quarters once every so often. And to me, like there are several games that we can talk about with Ohio State losing to inferior teams because those teams put together on a night that Ohio State happened to not do so. And so if you take all of that and kind of keep that in mind, when we talk about Michigan and what could happen if Michigan, POOs the bed here again this season, that means in theory that there is now a power void, a power vacuum in the Big Ten recruiting with kids that would have normally gone to Michigan or would have been, interested in Michigan, all of a sudden not. And now there's a void to be filled. And there is no other guy in the entire Big Ten capable of filling that than PJ Fleck in Minnesota. So they are absolutely rooting for Michigan and that ship to sink entirely because the after effects, the downstream effects of that, most of those kids probably going to programs like Minnesota. So it is absolutely possible that this is a trending upward program and due in large part to what PJ has done. And you can talk all about the personality and the row the boat and everything and whether people are actually into that. I think it's a little snake oil salesman for me. That's just a personal opinion. But like it works, right? Like he's had success everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, some people love that. Some
people dig that. People in football circles love that stuff. And so it's absolutely huge. And I think you have to give credit to where it's due. And so there is potential right now. It's probably the biggest season we've had in Minnesota football for a long time. There's potential in a lot of ways for them to fill the void that Michigan is vacating right now.
And look, I think this is a big year for the current version of Minnesota.
Yeah,
because sure. It can a good year in 2021 for the Gophers can, I think, basically take last year and for most fans just say, okay, COVID year, outlier. Crazy challenges, just total outlier, flush it, wash it away, doesn't matter. And feel like the program is still trending where it was a couple of years ago. They've got it, when you bring back a quarterback that has been with the program for several years, when you bring back that experience in offensive line, and a running back that's had that much success, that's a core that you feel you can really build upon.
Yeah.
The defense has to step up and do their job, but I think the quote unquote matchup in the game of watching Minnesota trying to run the ball against a Buckeye front seven that, feels they've got a really solid defensive line and a group of linebackers that the Buckeyes sure like, but need to go out and prove it. That could be the real key matchup to watch in this game.
Yeah, I agree. I think it is absolutely. I think it's battle one. It's like, kind of like thing to watch one. If we're talking about providing context for the game, I think if you like to kind of peel back a layer or two, that's probably the big one to watch. And then I think what we talked about earlier, it's the Ohio State wide receivers against an unproven secondary, and whether or not the Buckeyes can get the ball to those playmakers.
I just dropped a comment in the comment thread with the link for this article if you're interested in reading some of the other stuff that we've put in there, and you can find the other Ohio State offense-related one on BuckeyesNow.com as well. But all in all, Brett, I mean, look, I think there are some trends here that are worth following. It's obviously tough when you're doing this at the beginning of the year. The nature of college football is that you're going to have a lot of turnover, but both sides have a similar coaching staff to what they did last year. Typically, when you have the same coaching staff in place, you've got generally the same, schematics, coaching philosophy, strategy in place. So, to sit here and fairly criticize, Minnesota's lack of ability to get in the backfield last year, and to also criticize the Buckeye secondary from last year, I think those are at least fair places to say, that both teams have spent a lot of time and energy focusing on the offseason here.
Yeah, I agree. I saw a couple tweets earlier today about from some Minnesota accounts talking about how, all the experience they're bringing back. And one of the stats was, I think it was every guy who made a tackle for Minnesota a season ago is back, and how it's like, oh man, look at how good of the defense is, because all this experience, kind of battlefield experience, so to speak, is coming back. And my first thing is, if the thing that tells to me is that the classes above those guys were totally terrible. If you're bringing back everybody who made a tackle, the junior and senior classes totally stink on that side of the ball. But all that being said, that's still a positive. That's a net positive for Minnesota. So I think if you're a Gophers fan, you're probably not watching us. But if you do, please keep watching. We'd love to talk about you. I think you're optimistic, and I think that's absolutely massive. And in this game for Ohio State fans, that's something to keep an eye on, because it's sheer house money confidence with this fan base right now, and it's never been like that before. And I think that's awesome to see.
We've got a ton of content planned here to not only cover the game but lead up to it tomorrow. And break down what we learned coming up in the days following the game. So please keep it here, BuckeyesNow.com, for everything related to Ohio State football. We'll have predictions put out. We'll have some key matchups, some key observations, key players you want to keep your eye on coming into the game. We've got a lot of video content planned the day of, and obviously the couple of days post game as well. We are off and rolling. It's really nice to be talking about real football and know that there's a game here in 48 hours.
Fired up and super excited for our season-long prediction race and what that might entail when I win it, come first week of December, and how the glory that I will be reaping from my expertise when basically winging it. And when it comes to predictions this season, is going to be fantastic. I can't wait.
I am certainly going to have to cut a clip of you saying that and hold you to that. For sure.
Board material, baby. I'm coming for you, Prescott.
Oh, I love it. For Brett Hiltbrand, I'm Brendan Gulick. We'll see you guys real soon. BuckeyesNow.com.
He's going to crush me. He's going to absolutely kill me this season. It's not even going to be close.
I can't wait. It's going to be great. All right. We'll see you guys soon. Thanks.